Hey guys, tonight we travel far beyond the familiar worlds of Rome and Greece and into a land of vast deserts, snow-capped mountains, royal highways, and rulers whose power stretched farther than most people could even imagine. This is the story of ancient Persia, a civilization that rose from some of the harshest landscapes on Earth and transformed itself into one of the greatest empires in human history. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these journeys through history. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, settle into your favorite chair, and let's step back thousands of years into a world where survival came first and greatness came later. Long before Persia became a name feared and respected across continents, life on the Iranian plateau was anything but easy. This was not a land that welcomed people with open arms. It challenged them every single day. The summers were brutally hot, turning the earth into a furnace that seemed determined to melt both man and beast. Winters could be equally cruel, bringing icy winds across the mountains and freezing temperatures that made survival feel like an achievement. Rain was unpredictable, fertile land was limited, and water was often more valuable than gold. If you woke up each morning in this environment, your first concern was not wealth, politics, or glory. It was simply making it through another day. Small tribes moved across the landscape with their animals, searching for grazing lands and reliable water sources. Their lives revolved around sheep, goats, cattle, and especially horses. Horses were not just transportation, they were status, power, and survival rolled into one. A person with strong horses could travel farther, hunt better, and defend themselves more effectively. In many ways, the horse became the foundation of Persian success long before any king ever sat on a throne. These early communities relied heavily on cooperation. A lone individual had little chance against the harsh realities of nature. Families worked together. Tribes worked together. Every member had a role. Children learned practical skills from an early age, while elders preserved knowledge and traditions. Since writing was rare or non-existent among these early groups, stories became incredibly important. History, religion, family heritage, and lessons about survival were passed from generation to generation through spoken words. Around campfires, people shared tales of heroes, spirits, battles, and ancestors. Every story served a purpose. Forgetting a story meant losing a piece of your identity. Memory was more than a skill. It was a responsibility. The natural world shaped nearly every aspect of life. The sun brought warmth, but also danger. Rivers provided life, but could disappear during droughts. Storms could save crops or destroy them. Among all these forces, fire held a special place. Fire cooked food, provided warmth, protected against predators, and illuminated the darkness. Without it, survival became far more difficult. It is no surprise that fire gradually gained spiritual significance. People looked into the flames and saw something pure, powerful, and almost sacred. Long before formal religions emerged, the relationship between humans and fire was already deeply woven into daily life. Trust also became essential. In a small community, dishonesty could have serious consequences. If someone lied about a water source, the entire group could suffer. If a hunter exaggerated danger or concealed information, lives could be lost. Truthfulness was not merely a moral ideal, it was practical. Communities survived because people trusted one another. Over time, values like honesty, loyalty, and courage became central to the culture. These ideas would later become important foundations of Persian civilization itself. As generations passed, tribes became more settled. Small villages appeared. Trade slowly developed between neighboring groups. Knowledge expanded. Farmers learned how to cultivate crops more effectively. Craftsmen improved their skills. Metalworking advanced. What had once been scattered communities slowly began transforming into something larger. Yet the process was neither quick nor peaceful. Competition for resources remained constant. Neighboring tribes argued, fought, formed alliances, and broke them again. Leadership emerged not through grand ceremonies, but through necessity. The strongest leaders were often those who could provide stability during difficult times. A good leader protected the community, settled disputes, and ensured access to resources. A bad leader usually did not remain a leader for very long. By the first millennium BCE, the region was changing rapidly. New kingdoms emerged across the Near East. Powerful states competed for territory and influence. The people living on the Iranian plateau could no longer remain isolated from these developments. They found themselves increasingly connected to larger political and economic networks. Trade routes expanded. New technology spread. Cultural influences moved from one region to another. The world was becoming more interconnected, and the ancestors of the Persians were preparing to take their place within it. One of the first major groups to rise to prominence were the Medes. Settling primarily in the northwestern regions of the plateau, they benefited from relatively favorable geography compared to the harsher central deserts. Over time, the Medes grew stronger and more organized. Tribal structures gradually evolved into a more centralized political system. According to ancient traditions, leaders emerged who sought to unite various groups under common authority. Whether every detail of these stories is accurate remains uncertain, but the broader pattern is clear. The Medes were becoming a serious power. Life under the Medes brought greater stability than many communities had previously experienced. Trade expanded. Settlements grew. Local leaders began cooperating more regularly. For ordinary people, stability meant fewer disruptions and better opportunities. Farmers could focus more on growing crops and less on defending themselves from raids. Merchants could travel with somewhat greater confidence. Communities began investing in long-term development rather than merely reacting to immediate threats. The Medes also developed military capabilities that made neighboring powers take notice. Ancient warfare was brutal and unforgiving. Success required discipline, organization, and resources. The Medes proved capable of all three. Their armies became increasingly effective, allowing them to expand their influence throughout the region. Eventually, they participated in one of the most significant events of the ancient world, the downfall of the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians had dominated the Near East for centuries. Their military reputation was legendary. They were feared for their discipline, efficiency, and ruthlessness. Many believed their power could never be broken. Yet even the mightiest empires faced challenges. Internal problems weakened Assyria at the same time its enemies were growing stronger. Coalitions formed. Campaigns intensified. Eventually, the Assyrian state collapsed, creating a major power vacuum across the region. For the Medes, this victory represented a turning point. Suddenly, they found themselves among the dominant powers of the ancient world. Their influence expanded dramatically. Their leaders gained prestige. Their future seemed bright. Yet beneath the surface, another group was quietly rising. They lived farther south and were often viewed as subordinate allies. Few observers at the time would have predicted that they would soon eclipse everyone around them. These people were the Persians. At first, the Persians did not appear especially remarkable. They occupied territories in the region known as Persis, corresponding roughly to parts of modern southern Iran. They paid tribute to more powerful neighbors and focused primarily on local concerns. But appearances can be deceptive. Within these communities, traditions of leadership, military skill, and cultural identity were steadily developing. Families built networks of influence. Local rulers strengthened their positions. Ambition quietly grew. The Persian homeland itself played an important role in shaping its people. Conditions remained challenging. Resources were never unlimited. Success required adaptability and determination. Communities learned to make efficient use of what they had. Hardship encouraged resilience. Resilience encouraged innovation. Over time, these qualities became deeply embedded within Persian society. As the 6th century BCE approached, the stage was being set for one of history's most remarkable transformations. The Medes remained powerful. Other kingdoms dominated surrounding regions. Yet beneath the surface, forces were gathering that would soon reshape the entire ancient world. A leader would emerge whose vision extended far beyond local rivalries and regional politics. Under his leadership, the Persians would rise from relative obscurity to create an empire unlike anything the world had ever seen. The Age of Kings was approaching. The Age of Persia was about to begin. And once it started, history would never look the same again. The rise of Persia truly began when a young ruler named Cyrus stepped onto the stage of history. And while many kings before him had dreamed of power, very few possessed the combination of intelligence, patience, charisma, and military skill that Cyrus seemed to have naturally. At first, the Persians remained under the influence of the Medes, and to most observers, this arrangement appeared stable enough. The Median Empire was respected, its rulers were established, and there seemed little reason to believe that a dramatic change was coming. Yet beneath the surface, Cyrus was carefully building support, strengthening alliances, and creating the foundations of something much larger. When he finally challenged Median authority around 550 BCE, the conflict was not merely a rebellion, it was the beginning of a new era. The Median king Astyages expected loyalty and obedience, but instead found himself facing an opponent who understood both warfare and leadership. Many Median forces eventually shifted their support towards Cyrus, and before long, the Median Empire was absorbed into what would become the Persian Empire. What made this achievement remarkable was not simply the victory itself, but what happened afterward. In the ancient world, conquering rulers often destroyed rivals, erased traditions, and ruled through fear alone. Cyrus took a different approach. Rather than treating conquered peoples as enemies, he frequently allowed them to maintain their customs, religions, and local traditions. This strategy was not born from weakness. It was an incredibly effective form of control. People are far less likely to rebel when their way of life is respected. Cyrus understood this better than almost anyone of his era. As Persian power expanded, city after city and kingdom after kingdom came under his authority. Yet unlike many conquerors whose victories left devastation behind them, Cyrus developed a reputation for fairness that spread far beyond his borders. One of his greatest achievements came with the conquest of Lydia in Anatolia, a wealthy kingdom famous for its resources and trade networks. The defeat of Lydia brought enormous wealth into Persian hands and opened important routes connecting east and west. Merchants, travelers, and officials could now move across larger territories under a single authority. Trade flourished, communication improved, and Persia's influence continued to grow. But Cyrus was not finished. The most famous of all his conquests was Babylon. At the time, Babylon was one of the greatest cities on earth. Its walls were legendary, its temples magnificent, and its history stretched back centuries. Many believed it was unconquerable. Yet in 539 BCE, Cyrus entered Babylon and achieved what countless rulers had failed to accomplish. According to historical accounts, he was welcomed by many inhabitants rather than resisted. Instead of presenting himself as a destroyer, he portrayed himself as a liberator. He respected local religious traditions and worked to gain support from the population. One of the most significant examples of this policy was his decision to allow various displaced groups, including the Jewish exiles, to return to their homelands. This action earned him lasting respect in historical memory and demonstrated once again that his approach to empire was fundamentally different. By the end of his reign, Cyrus had created the largest empire the world had yet seen. Stretching from Central Asia to the Mediterranean, it united diverse peoples under a single political authority. Yet perhaps his greatest achievement was not territorial expansion, but the creation of a model for governing that vast territory. He showed that an empire could be held together not only through military force, but through cooperation, tolerance, and effective administration. For ordinary people living under Persian rule, life often became more stable than it had been under previous regimes. Roads became safer, trade routes expanded, and local communities were generally allowed to continue their traditions without interference. Of course, no empire was perfect, and Persian rule still depended on taxation, military strength, and political control. But compared with many alternatives of the ancient world, it often appeared remarkably practical and relatively flexible. When Cyrus eventually died, his legacy was already secure. Yet the empire he created faced a difficult question. Could such an enormous realm survive without the man who built it? History is filled with examples of empires collapsing immediately after the death of a powerful founder. Successors argue, provinces rebel, and rivals seize opportunities. Many expected Persia to follow the same path. Instead, it continued growing. Cyrus was succeeded by his son Cambyses II, who inherited not only a massive empire but also the responsibility of maintaining it. Cambyses quickly demonstrated that Persian expansion was far from over. His most famous accomplishment was the conquest of Egypt, one of the oldest civilizations in human history. Egypt had survived countless challenges over thousands of years and possessed immense cultural prestige. Bringing it under Persian control was no small achievement. The addition of Egypt transformed the empire into an even greater superpower. Its resources, strategic location, and economic value strengthened Persian influence across the region. Yet success created new challenges. As the empire expanded, governing it became increasingly difficult. Distances were enormous. Messages traveled slowly by ancient standards. Local leaders possessed varying degrees of loyalty. Different populations spoke different languages and followed different customs. Holding such a vast realm together required more than military victories. It required administration on a scale never before attempted. Following the death of Cambyses, political turmoil briefly threatened stability. Competing claims to power emerged, uncertainty spread, and the future of the empire seemed unclear. In many states, such instability would have triggered collapse. Persia, however, found another extraordinary leader. His name was Darius. If Cyrus was the visionary who created the empire, Darius was the organizer who made it function. When Darius took power, he inherited a realm of extraordinary size but considerable complexity. Revolts had erupted in several regions, local rulers tested limits, and the administrative system needed improvement. Darius responded with remarkable energy and determination. He understood that conquest alone could not guarantee survival. The empire required structure. One of his most important innovations was the division of the empire into administrative regions, known as satrapies. Each satrapy was governed by a satrap responsible for maintaining order, collecting taxes, and implementing royal policies. However, Darius also recognized the dangers of giving too much power to regional governors. To prevent corruption and rebellion, he established systems of oversight. Royal inspectors traveled throughout the empire reporting directly to the king. These officials became known as the king's eyes and ears, a name that likely caused more than a few nervous moments among ambitious governors. The tax system also underwent major reforms. Rather than relying on irregular demands, Darius introduced standardized assessments based on the resources and productivity of each region. This created predictability and improved efficiency. Farmers, merchants, and local officials knew what was expected, making economic planning easier. Trade expanded further under Darius thanks to improvements in infrastructure. Roads connected distant territories, allowing goods and information to move more effectively than ever before. The most famous of these routes was the Royal Road, stretching across vast distances and linking major centers of administration. Couriers could travel rapidly using relay stations positioned along the road. Messages that once required weeks or months could now move with unprecedented speed. Herodotus later praised this communication system, emphasizing the dedication of the messengers who carried information regardless of weather or obstacles. Commerce also benefited from the introduction of standardized coinage. The gold daric became one of the most respected currencies of the ancient world, facilitating trade across enormous distances. Merchants from different regions could conduct business more easily, strengthening economic integration throughout the empire. Markets grew busier. Goods moved farther. Wealth circulated more effectively. Under Darius, Persia evolved from a collection of conquered territories into a sophisticated administrative machine. What made these achievements even more impressive was the scale involved. Millions of people across 3 continents lived under Persian rule. Numerous languages were spoken, countless traditions were practiced. Yet the empire continued functioning with a level of stability that amazed both contemporaries and later historians. For ordinary citizens, these developments often meant greater security and opportunity. Roads improved travel. Trade created jobs. Administrative systems reduced uncertainty. While life remained difficult for many, the empire provided a framework within which communities could thrive. Farmers cultivated fields, craftsmen produced goods, merchants crossed long distances, and families built futures. Most people never met the king, never visited the great capitals, and never participated in major political decisions. Yet the policies created at the highest levels influenced nearly every aspect of their lives. By the time Darius completed his reforms, Persia stood as the dominant power of the known world. Its armies were formidable, its economy was strong, its administration was efficient, its influence stretched farther than any previous empire. To many observers, it appeared unstoppable. Yet history has a habit of testing even the strongest powers. Beyond Persia's western frontiers, new challenges were beginning to emerge. Across the Aegean Sea, a collection of independent Greek city-states watched Persian expansion with increasing concern. At first, these communities seemed insignificant compared to the vast resources of the empire. But appearances can be deceiving. The encounters between Persia and the Greeks would eventually become some